A deep pain throbbed through my skull when I finally came to and opened my eyes. It was dull, but persistent. I lay strapped into that old familiar beige leather seat inside my cockpit, surrounded by the broken bones of my ship, the Argo, which had once been a marvel of human engineering. Now it was nothing more than a splintered husk, half buried in a foreign land. I sat there in my chair, rubbing my skull, trying to massage the pain away. Then, and even now, I have no recollection of exactly how we crashed. Just flashes of memory here and there, my crew panicking and the captain barking orders at us, seeing a behemoth of a mountain as we descended, and then nothing. I struggled against my harness, strapping me to my seat. Violently, I pressed at the button, but it wouldn't release me. I then remembered my safety knife. I reached down and grabbed it, cutting myself free and stumbling onto the deck with a loud thud. I stayed there for a moment, on my hands and knees, my vision still somewhat blurry. When I finally regained my senses enough, I could sense that I was completely alone. No other voices echoed through the empty halls, no shouts or cries for help, just me and the wreckage. Stepping out of the cockpit and into the rest of the ship, I caught a glimpse of the planet stretching before me, through a massive gash that was torn into the side of our ship. It was an endless sea of red dust and twisted rock formations, bathed in the light of a swollen sun that hung low in the sky. It was still too early in the day to distinguish familiar constellations. There are no signposts in space to indicate where I was or when I was. "Is anyone there?" I called out, my voice hoarse and giving out, but only the cracking moans of the ship answered. I looked around inside, but there was no signs of anyone, and so I stepped out through that massive gash in the side of the ship onto the alien world and scanned my immediate surroundings. But again I found nothing but twisted metal and debris. The rest of my crew was just nowhere to be seen, and the ship's emergency beacons were completely dead. I could feel the panic rising, but I shoved it down as best I could. I couldn't go losing my head as well as my crew, I thought to myself. As I was getting lost in my moment of despair, a distant sound caught my attention, a soft rustling like fabric dragging over stone. I squinted into the distance, in the direction of the sound. Perhaps it was something, but it turned out to be nothing, because whatever it was, if it was something at all, had completely vanished. I wasn't going to wait around, playing with the rocks all day. I needed to find the crew, and so I re-entered the ship, grabbing some equipment and supplies. I grabbed a rifle and some ammunition too, just in case, and then turned on my watch, making a pinpoint of where the ship was. I did see a trail, not of human feet, but nevertheless it was a trail, leading away from the ship, and so of course I followed it. I followed it for around about half an hour, and it led me to a hill overlooking a large stretch of land, and my eyes lit up with glee as my gaze fell upon a beautiful lake of crystal clear water. Its surface shimmered. It was enticing to me. I could hear it, catcalling. It wanted me to drink, and my unquenchable thirst pulled me towards it, and I pretty much fell down the hill, and fine red dust and rocks kicked up behind me. Striding over, I crouched at the water's edge. The lake was impossibly still. Not even a ripple disturbed its surface. Cupping my hands, I then dipped them into the water and brought them back up again to my lips. A thought did run through my mind that maybe this water wasn't so safe to drink. However, the thought didn't last very long. It was fine, almost too fine, as if it was distilled and filtered by something beyond human comprehension. It was ridiculously refreshing, and I wanted more. I dipped my hands back in again, and that's when something in the water caught my attention. The sight of something moving in the deep. A host of little critters, little space fishes is what they were, swimming about. Strange looking little creatures. My initial opinion of this planet was that it was barren and dead, but I was completely wrong. This planet was more alive than I could imagine. Lost I was, completely. That is, for a moment, wondering what other forms of life may live here. That was before my mind returned back to the mission at hand, to find my friends. I was growing very weary with worry for them, especially as night began to fall. What if these other forms of life that I had conjured up in my mind are somehow responsible for my crew's disappearance? And why is it that they didn't take me as well? I looked down at the red dirt and the white rocks, picking one up and throwing it aside in frustration, knowing that for that day I couldn't go any further than the lake, and so I made a new marker on a data pad I took from the ship that was connected to my watch, so I wouldn't forget where the lake was, you see. And pulling myself up off my knees and back onto my feet, I began the walk back to my ship, deeply saddened by the fact that I couldn't find my crew that day. But there was always the next day, and I was determined. By the time I made it back to the ship, the twin moons orbiting this planet were high in the darkening sky. I gazed upon the husk of twisted metal, rough it was, and I guess, to take my mind away from the ever-growing dread, there was a new urge that surged up within me to start repairs. If I could just get something working, I thought, anything, then maybe I could pinpoint my crew or send out a distress signal and get help. However, I was unfortunately far too tired to do anything more for that day, so I found my bunk, popped a few sleepaways, and drifted off. The days crept on and bled into weeks. To keep myself from going completely mad, I developed a system, spending mornings scavenging through the wreckage and looking for any signs to indicate what happened to the others. I would do expeditions and go further and further out, but finding nothing. That is of the crew. I did come across many alien species, and to the north, the barren wasteland gave way to a more fruitful looking biome. The biome is a lot more lush. I wished that the ship had crashed a lot more closer to it, if I'm honest. But it didn't, and I had to face that fact. I won't lie, I did want to go explore it, and eventually I did. After the first few weeks, the expeditions happened less and less, and I had accepted my current situation. I would spend most of my time near the lake, gathering water and staring into its depths. Other times I pieced together fragments of the ship, patching up massive holes and rewiring and reprogramming circuits with patience. I spent a lot of my time working on the communications array. If I could just get it operational, then maybe I might still have a chance of making it off this world. And after much trial and error, I managed to put together something that actually worked. Formed from the battered remains of the ship's systems, coaxing the last remnants of power from its solar cells. And then the moment came to fire her up. I hit the button, and after a few very awkward moments, it cracked to life. I mean, it sounded like it would take off at any moment, but it worked, and I wasted absolutely no time sending out a signal, a simple repeated distress call, beeping its plea into the void, leaning over the console, hands sweaty and trembling, as I spoke aloud the message. It must not have been pleasant to listen to, as my voice was hoarse and it cracked to life through the comms array. This is Ellis Thornborough, crew member of the Argo. Do you hear me? We've crashed on an unidentified planet, and the rest of my crew is missing. I've been stranded here for several weeks now, with no contact. I don't know if anyone can hear this, but if you do, please, send me help. I waited, and I waited. Believe it or not, interstellar communication isn't exactly instant. I knew that at best it would take a couple of months to get back to Earth, so I was hoping that maybe a nearby space station, or maybe a ship passing by, would pick it up, but unfortunately there was no response. I adjusted the frequency a little, and boosted the signal, and waited some more, but again, nothing. So I just tried to stay busy while waiting, but the silence gnawed at me. Time became slippery and strange, and the only companion I had was the steady, lonely pulse of the distress beacon. Then, one day, while working on reinforcing the ship's hull, I heard them calling out to me. "Over here," someone called from the distance. I jerked upright, heart racing. I spun around, searching for the source, and saw figures moving in the distance. People, they were walking towards me, a small group, dressed in ragged uniforms, dust-covered and weary, but unmistakably human. "It cannot be," I whispered in disbelief, but as I saw the shadowy silhouettes walking towards me, relief washed over like a wave. They were survivors. A tall woman with short black hair led the group. She waved, smiling weakly. "Ellis, you made it. We thought you were gone." "I can't believe it," I replied, as I rushed over to greet my friends with a big warm hug, tears flowing from our eyes and our voices cracking with emotion. "Where have you been?" "Scattered. Many of us were ejected from the ship," the woman, Myra, said. "We've been trying to find our way back ever since the crash. It's a miracle we even found you. Unfortunately, it's only 6 of us. Only God knows what has happened to the others. Well, we've all survived, so if we've survived, there could be more, and we will find them," I said in reply. After much jubilation, we all set up inside the ship, making it our temporary base. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel so alone. There were 6 survivors. You had Myra, Mark, Sophia, Tyler, Hannah, and Julian. They were battered and bruised, worse for wear, but thankfully alive. That night we sat around the campfire just outside the ship, as we all shared stories of our struggles to survive. The tales were high and mighty, of the landscapes that they all traversed, and the bizarre creatures that they had encountered. They took turns keeping watch, and everybody settled into a natural routine. Some of us going out hunting for food, repairing the ship. We were a team again, just like the old times. I won't lie, being alone for so long absolutely wreaked havoc with my mental health. However, as I sat there, looking around at my fellow crewmen, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. Together we worked on making the ship habitable, and now that there were a few more hands, it made it a lot more easier. But the planet never forgot to let us know where we were. On the 4th day, after the survivors of my crew had turned up, there was a massive sandstorm that tore through our camp. Thankfully, everyone was okay, and for a moment I feared for our distress beacon, but it was undamaged. On one rather chilly night, as the sun dipped behind the distant mountains, casting the world into a deep purple gloom, I sat with Myra by the ship's entrance, sharing a quiet meal. Mushroom soup. Not the same types of mushrooms we have back on Earth. No, these were little critters, kind of like turtles. They have an outer shell, but it looked like a mushroom. "Do you think anyone will come for us?" she asked me. "The signal's strong. Someone has to hear it eventually. I guess our only option is to just be patient. What else are we going to do? And if we are here for a while, I think we can manage." "Ellis," Mara said, giving me a side eye. "What? All I'm saying is, we have a good gender distribution. And look, we might be here for some time." "Yeah, but I don't think that would work now, would it, Ellis?" she said to me. Mara smiled to herself as she looked down and prodded her food with her fork. "It was really hard out there, Ellis. Not knowing why I was the only survivor. For weeks I trekked through the forest. I thought I would die. And I don't want to die here, Ellis." I understood what she meant. I often felt the same way. And I knew that there was nothing I could say or do to really comfort her. I just stayed with her for the rest of that night. The others were growing more quieter, more withdrawn. Tyler spent more of his free time just sitting atop a hill, a stone's throw away from the ship, just staring off into the distance, as if he had seen something that none of us could see. Mark had taken to pacing the ship's corridor, just muttering to himself in agitated tones. All of them were acting weird. One afternoon, I returned from a trip to the lake to find Julian just sitting alone by the ship's entrance, staring blankly at his feet. "Hey man, you alright?" I asked, taking a seat next to him. Julian didn't look up at me. He hardly even acknowledged that I was even there. "I don't know, man. Sometimes I feel like none of this is even real, you know? Things just feel odd, like a dream." "I don't know, Julian. You shouldn't be thinking that way. It's very destructive. Look, by the grace of God, we made it, lad. We are okay. Just keep it together, just a little longer." I sat by the fire for the rest of that evening, with Julian, not saying a word. When night bore down on us, he asked me, "I'm feeling cold. Could you pass me that blanket, please?" It was quite a cold night, and Julian was one of those kinds of people who felt the cold very, very easily, so I placed it over him and headed back into the ship. But one thing that Julian said lingered in my mind. There was an odd feeling around camp. It was that very same night, as I lay in my bed, that I woke to the sounds of whispering. Thinking it was just the others, I turned over and tried to doze back off, to no avail. I couldn't take any more sleepaways, as we had run out. The voices were distracting, but they were faint, just faint murmurings. But it was keeping me up, and I couldn't fall back to sleep. I rolled back over and off my bed, put on my clothes and my boots, and followed the sound through the ship's darkened corridors. The whispers grew louder as I got closer to the main deck. I shouted out, "You guys need to keep it down." But as I turned the corner, There was nothing. Nobody there. Perhaps I was hallucinating that as well. Guys, I called out, but again there was no response. And then what happened, Ellis? Well, sir, at that point I left the ship, stepping out and seeing Julian still out there lying on his side, covered completely by the blanket I had given to him. The fire had completely died, just a few embers still alive in an ash pile. I reached out to shake Julian awake, then it all came back to me as I pulled the cover off of him. He was as cold as ice. He was the last one. I was in complete shock at the realization. I glanced up atop the hill, the one that I'd always saw Tyler sitting on, and that's when I noticed the markers in the shape of crosses. There were 7 of them. Myra, Mark, Sophia, Tyler, Hannah, and there was one more, that one being for Julian. Eventually, I would dig another one for myself, in case we were ever found, long after I had gone. At the time, I was still malfunctioning. How did you come to the realization? Years passed and I didn't age a day. I didn't eat for 3 months and I was completely fine. Thought I was immortal. Maybe it was the water I was drinking, but I found out the truth one day. As I was exploring in the north, I fell down a cliff and broke my leg. That it exposed my metallic exoskeleton. Well, it looks like you've taken a few bumps since then, Ellis. All of your bolts are showing. Sir, what will happen to me now? Will I be repurposed? Well, Ellis, that's not up to me. But most likely, you have shown great loyalty to mankind, Ellis, unlike some of your other brethren. But you older generations, you were outlawed some time ago now. Too independent, too human. You are causing a lot of trouble. But sir, I don't want to die.